And tributes are pouring in from fellow artists, celebrities, and public figures.
Our Mark Cotarobis is live in the newsroom now with a look at some of the reaction to Dolly's passing. Mark.
Yeah, David and Giovanna, good afternoon. We are hearing today from fellow entertainers. They are shocked. They are heartbroken by the news and the passing of Dolly Parton.
On Tuesday, August 25th, 2026, the world lost one of its most beloved entertainers. Dolly Parton died at the age of 80 at the Vanderbilt Ingram Cancer Center in Nashville, surrounded by loved ones, after what her family described as a brief battle with cancer. The type of cancer was never disclosed publicly. One final private detail from a woman who spent nearly 6 decades living in front of cameras while somehow keeping the parts of her life she wanted to protect completely her own. Within minutes of the news breaking, her nephew Brian Seaver stepped in front of a camera to deliver the message himself, in a video that would be shared and replayed across every corner of the internet within hours. Seaver, the son of Dolly's sister Cassie, explained that his aunt had asked him years earlier to be the one to make the announcement when the time came. His voice cracked as he introduced himself not as a spokesperson but as family, telling the world that Dolly Rebecca Parton Dean, known to some as sister, to others as sis, and to the next generation as Granny and Gigi, had passed. He said the sadness belonged to those left behind, not to Dolly, because Dolly, in his words, had lived in the light and was now in the arms of Jesus, reunited with Carl, her parents, and the countless people who had been waiting to meet her. The scale of the reaction that followed was almost impossible to measure. Landmarks around the world lit up pink overnight in her honor, from the Empire State Building in New York to the Pacific Park Ferris wheel on the Santa Monica Pier. Tributes poured in from Paul McCartney, Oprah Winfrey, Taylor Swift, Beyoncé, and Elton John, a list that on its own tells you something about how far Dolly's reach extended beyond country music and into nearly every corner of culture. But of everyone who spoke publicly in those first hours, one voice stood above the rest because it did not belong to a colleague or an admirer. It belonged to her goddaughter. Miley Cyrus has called Dolly Parton her Aunt Dolly for her entire life. The relationship began before Miley was even born. In the early 1990s, Dolly toured alongside Miley's father, Billy Ray Cyrus, and the two became close friends. When Billy Ray learned he was having a daughter, he asked Dolly to be her godmother, and Dolly said yes without hesitation. Years later, when Miley was cast as the star of a Disney Channel show about a teenager living a double life as a pop singer, the producers wrote in a recurring character named Aunt Dolly, played by the real Dolly Parton herself. It became one of the most beloved parts of the show. Miley has said publicly that those were her favorite episodes to film, and that the experience of working alongside Dolly on set was what truly cemented their bond as something closer to mother and daughter than godmother and goddaughter. Over the following 2 decades, the two collaborated repeatedly. Dolly appeared on Miley's 2017 song Rainbowland. Miley joined Dolly on stage at the 2019 Grammys for a rendition of Jolene, one of the most talked-about performances of that ceremony. In 2023, Dolly recorded her own cover of Miley's Wrecking Ball for her rock album, turning her goddaughter's breakup anthem into something entirely new. As recently as this year, the two appeared together again on a reworked version of Dolly's 1977 song Light of a Clear Blue Morning, alongside Lainey Wilson, Queen Latifah, and Reba McEntire. In an interview earlier this year, Miley described Dolly as someone who had been like a mother to her, and revealed that Dolly had personally encouraged her decision to promote her Hannah Montana 20th anniversary special before it even existed, telling her that if you want something to happen, you announce it first and let the momentum carry you. So when the news broke that Dolly had died, Miley did not wait. Within minutes, before most of the entertainment industry had even processed what was happening, she posted on social media, writing that she could not believe the world had just lost the purest soul, and telling Dolly to rest in glory. The following day, she posted a longer, more personal tribute alongside a black and white photograph of the two of them. She wrote that the feeling of losing her Aunt Dolly was beyond what felt right to share publicly, and that their most sacred moments had always stayed private, tucked behind the stage, beneath the glamour, and between their hearts. She said she knew Dolly would want her to feel the loss fully, write a song about it, and then keep going with strength, adding that she has always had an angel by her side. She revealed that one of their final conversations together had been about music and about metamorphosis, a detail that felt almost too fitting given how much of both women's careers have been built around reinvention. She closed her message with a line pulled straight from Dolly's own most famous song, telling her that she would always love her, and that from one mountain woman to another, that would never change. Of everything written about Dolly Parton in the days since her death, Miley's tribute is the one that has been shared, quoted, and replayed more than almost any other, not because it was the most polished, but because it was the most obviously real. While the tributes from the outside world grew louder, Dolly's own family made clear that her farewell would be handled the way she lived most of her private life, which is to say quietly and on her own terms. Her representatives confirmed that a small, private funeral service would be held for immediate family only, exactly as Dolly had requested. No public memorial has been announced, no guest list has been released, and no eulogies have been made public. That single decision, more than almost anything else, tells you who Dolly Parton really was underneath the wigs and the rhinestones. This was a woman who could have filled a stadium with mourners and, instead, chose a small room with the people who actually knew her. In place of flowers, her family asked fans to make donations to the Imagination Library, the childhood literacy program Dolly founded in 1995 that has since mailed free books to millions of children around the world every single month, a cause that arguably outlasted and outgrew even her music career in terms of lives touched. Fans were directed instead to a message board on Dolly's official website, where tens of thousands of tributes have poured in from people who never met her but felt, somehow, like they had. Dolly had actually thought about this moment for years before it arrived. Back in a 2014 interview with Entertainment Weekly, she predicted that people would expect "I Will Always Love You" to be played at her funeral, the same way it had been played at Whitney Houston's. But she said that was not the song she wanted. Instead, she asked for an old country gospel hymn called "If We Never Meet Again This Side of Heaven," written in 1945 by Albert E. Brumley and later recorded by Johnny Cash. It had been her father's favorite song, performed at his own funeral back in November 2000, and Dolly said at the time that she wanted it sung at hers as well. According to reports, she is being laid to rest at Woodlawn Memorial Park and Mausoleum in Nashville, beside her husband of nearly 59 years, Carl Dean. Those close to her also revealed some smaller, more personal details in the days following her death, the kind of details that only Dolly Parton could make sound both funny and touching at the same time. She reportedly told her family that after a lifetime of wearing heavy rhinestones and towering wigs, she finally deserved to be comfortable, and asked to be buried resting in a bed of plush cotton, wearing a simple cotton dress, though she still insisted on being laid to rest in her signature high heels. She also left behind one more surprise for the world. Years ago, Dolly recorded a song called "My Place in History" and sealed it inside a time capsule at her Dollywood resort, with strict instructions that it not be opened until 2045, just months before what would have been her 100th birthday. Somewhere in Tennessee, an unheard Dolly Parton song is sitting in the dark, waiting nearly 2 decades to be played for the first time. To understand why so much of the public reaction to Dolly's death has circled back to her husband, Carl Dean, you have to understand just how unusual their marriage really was by celebrity standards. Dolly met Carl on her very first day living in Nashville in 1964, outside a laundromat called the Wishy Washy. She was 18 years old and had just arrived in the city with nothing but ambition. She later said she was so in love with Carl that she could not see straight. They married 2 years later, on May 30th, 1966, in a tiny ceremony in Ringgold, Georgia, attended only by Dolly's mother and the minister and his wife. There was no press, no photographers, nothing that resembled the life Dolly would go on to build for herself. That contrast defined their entire relationship. Carl Dean spent almost 60 years married to one of the most famous entertainers on the planet, while remaining almost completely invisible to the public. He rarely appeared at award shows, rarely gave interviews, and for years there were even jokes that he did not actually exist because so few photographs of him were in circulation. Dolly always pushed back on that idea, though she understood exactly why people said it. She explained in interviews that Carl was a quiet, reserved man who knew that if he ever stepped into the spotlight, he would never get a moment's peace again, and she respected that completely, working for decades to keep him out of the public eye as much as she possibly could. Their relationship was built on what Dolly called sensible separation, the idea that two people could be deeply devoted to each other without needing to be together every hour of every day. She often said that Carl had told her early on that he did not choose her world of fame and touring. She chose it. But that did not mean they could not keep their lives together while living them somewhat apart. Carl ran his own asphalt paving business in Tennessee and largely stayed out of the entertainment industry entirely, a decision that let Dolly build an empire without ever having to manage a husband's ego or ambitions alongside her own. It clearly worked for them. In 2016, 50 years after their courthouse wedding, the couple finally held the ceremony they had always planned to have, but never got around to. A private renewal of vows at their home near Nashville, with Dolly saying they simply had fun with it. Even Dolly's music carried traces of the relationship's more complicated moments. She has said that her song Jolene, one of the most famous songs she ever wrote, was inspired by a real woman who worked at their local bank and developed what Dolly called a terrible crush on Carl, one that became something of a running joke between the two of them for years, even as it clearly touched a nerve real enough to write an entire song about. Reports published around the time of Dolly's death have also suggested that behind the couple's carefully guarded public image, their marriage held more complexity than fans were ever shown, including rumored periods of strain over the decades. Dolly herself, however, never wavered publicly on how she felt about him. When the couple marked their 50th anniversary in 2016, Carl told a reporter he would not trade the last 50 years for anything on earth, and Dolly said just as plainly that not everybody gets to spend 50 years with somebody. But she had, and he had been the love of her life. Carl Dean died on March 3, 2025, at the age of 82, after living with Alzheimer's disease since 2019. Dolly announced his passing in a statement, writing that words could not do justice to the love they had shared for over 60 years and thanking fans for their prayers. Just 11 days later, in a moment many longtime fans still bring up, Dolly made her first public appearance since his death, surprising guests at Dollywood's 40th anniversary celebration. She told the crowd that of course she would always love him and would miss him, but she wanted them to know she would always love them too, a line that deliberately echoed her own most famous lyric. In interviews afterward, she admitted that losing Carl left a hole in her heart, but said she was at peace knowing he was at peace, and that losing him after being together for 60 years meant she would have to relearn parts of her life she had never had to think about before. She also later admitted, in an update roughly a year after his death, that she had stopped taking care of herself properly while caring for him during his illness, a comment that in hindsight reads differently now that we know how her own health declined not long after. Dolly Parton died a widow, roughly 17 months after burying the man she had spent almost 60 years married to, and now the two are together again in Nashville. That brings us to the question so many people have been asking since the moment news of her death broke, which is what happens to everything Dolly Parton built. Forbes had estimated her net worth at around $450 million as of last year, though some outlets tracking her business empire more closely, including her stake in Dollywood, her real estate, her royalties, and her licensing deals, have placed the figure closer to $650 million. Her music catalog alone, which includes more than 3,000 songs spanning Jolene, 9 to 5, and I Will Always Love You, was valued by Forbes at approximately $120 million in 2025, and because Dolly retained her own publishing rights after founding her own publishing company with her uncle back in 1966, that catalog has reportedly generated her somewhere between $6 and $8 million in royalties every single year, a stream of income that will now continue indefinitely. Then there is Dollywood itself. Dolly partnered with Hershin Family Enterprises in 1986 to transform what had been a struggling park called Silver Dollar City into the theme park that now bears her name, receiving a 50% stake in the process. Dollywood remains an active, functioning business rather than a personal asset that can simply be handed down like jewelry, which means its future will depend entirely on the ownership agreements and trusts that were already in place before Dolly died. Hershin has publicly stated that Dollywood will continue operating and that Dolly's legacy will remain at the heart of the park moving forward. What makes the inheritance question genuinely complicated is that Dolly Parton, Unlike most people who die with this kind of fortune, left behind no obvious single heir. She and Carl chose never to have children, a decision she spoke about openly over the years. With Carl gone before her and no children of her own, attention is turned to her extended family, which includes 6 surviving siblings out of the 12 she was originally born among, along with a wide network of nieces and nephews, including Brian Seaver, the nephew who announced her death to the world. Some clues about her intentions may come from Carl's own will, which was signed back in 2013 and became public after his death in 2025. In it, Carl left the entirety of his estate to a trust established in Dolly's name, along with all of his personal items, rights, titles, vehicles, jewelry, and musical equipment. He also stated that he would leave behind a handwritten note specifying exactly which of his nieces and nephews should receive particular personal items, though he noted that if that note could not be found, the decision would fall entirely to Dolly. As of this writing, Dolly's own will has not been made public, and no verified estate filing has confirmed exactly how her fortune will be distributed. What is known is that Dolly spoke openly, years before her death, about the importance of getting your affairs in order. Back in 2020, she revealed she was working with an estate lawyer specifically, so she would not leave what she called a mess behind for her family to fight over, telling one interviewer bluntly that you need to take care of that yourself, even if it is a pain, because you do not want to leave people fighting over what's left when you're gone. Given how deliberately Dolly built and protected everything else in her life and career, it would be entirely in character for her final act to be one more carefully planned decision, quietly designed so that the people and causes she loved most would be taken care of long after she was gone. In the end, what stands out most about the days following Dolly Parton's death is not just the size of her fortune or the scale of the tributes, but how consistent the story has remained across every single detail that has come out. A woman who spent decades building one of the most recognizable public personas in entertainment history managed, right up until the very end, to keep the parts of her life she wanted private genuinely private, while still making sure the parts she wanted to give away, her music, her literacy program, her generosity, reached as many people as possible. She planned her funeral song more than a decade in advance. She protected her husband's privacy for nearly 60 years, even as her own fame grew louder every year. She built a fortune while giving away enough of it that no one is entirely sure where the final number stands. And in her goddaughter Miley Cyrus